If you're someone who is fundamentally an honest and good person, they're not going to read you into this. That's military speak for brief you. They're not going to get read into a project like this. So when I began to explain how utterly, completely dysfunctional the American military-industrial, laboratory, corporate financial system is, and how deep black it actually operates. Anything important almost never is brought to the attention of the President of the United States. I can say this with some real solid authority. Or your Prime Minister, Cameron Brown. Isn't that who he is? Yeah. For now. So those are placeholders. It's a little bit like the Truman Show. Everybody see the movie in the Truman Show? You have people who are, you know, it's sort of the thing with Jim Carrey where he's living this world and it all ends up to be a set and it's all fake. I don't know. It's a great movie to look. It's a great, interesting parallel to this. And so the Truman Show is pretty much what our normal political system is, including most of the good people who are in your Ministry of Defense, intelligence community, politicians, etc. It's an extremely tightly compartmented operation. It's been very well funded. The other part to understand is nothing important of any strategic significance is above the surface of the earth. If it's above ground level, it's not really that important. It's fungible, replaceable. Everything critical is underground bases, all throughout the United States, Australia, Pine Gap, and also here in the UK. So anything that is critically important is not sitting above ground. You're not going to see it with a spy satellite, you're not going to see it from an aircraft, and access is multiple levels of entry. I've been in a couple places like this. So that's basically how it's managed. Super secret, illegally, and they tell the people they think they can manipulate. But they will tell certain people a little bit of information if they think they can manipulate them by giving them a little piece of it, usually a distorted piece. We had a president named Reagan, who put all this effort into the SDI, Star Wars initiative, which is really a cover story for putting platforms in space targeting interstellar vehicles, which is what we're doing. It really had nothing to do with brilliant pebbles. That was all just sort of a cover story. The real money was going into interstellar targeting and tracking of these ET craft and shooting them down, which we've been doing for a very long time. And they told him just enough information in a xenophobic way, in a way that was scary, to get his cooperation with that project. And that's why at the UN, if you Google it, you'll see that Reagan said, wouldn't our job of creating world unity and peace be easier if we had a common alien threat to unite against? Very familiar theme. Douglas MacArthur in 1950s, his last address to the Congress, said World War III will be interplanetary. This has been planned since I was 1 year old. I just turned 60 in June. Still bench 410. Anyway, but I know, I'm very eccentric about my workouts. But that's the problem, is that this secrecy has to do with another whole issue, and that is creating the psychological propaganda and the juggernaut so that people will accept the cost of the next level of militarizing the planet. Going from, and actually Wernher von Braun said, it would go from the Cold War to nations of concern, rogue states, to global terrorism. This was all in the disclosure stuff before 9/11. And then objects in space that could be a threat. You hear all this stuff about asteroids and stuff, to playing the final card, the alien threat, of which there is none. But it'd be great if people could be convinced there is, because they could support then, instead of $1 trillion a year coming into the military system, it could be 5 trillion or 6 trillion or 8 trillion, because the whole world, like the movie Independence Day, would unite. Let's kick alien butt. You see? It's jingoism of the worst kind of propaganda and brainwashing, which 99.9% of people who study the UFO subject have been completely infected with. And that creates its own problem, because ultimately, if you're going to have the public approach this subject in a way that's going to be helpful, it doesn't help to trade humans fighting with each other like murderous monkeys that we have for thousands of years to starting to fight within other planetary systems. This is not progress. So progress requires a more universal outlook based in the concepts of cosmic awareness and universal peace. It cannot break down into, oh, well, you know, yes, we're not alone in the universe, but by the way, there's something out here we need to be fighting. Why? Because if we do that, it's the end of the world, period. It really is. You're talking about weapon systems that are scalar electromagnetic systems that go beyond the speed of light. You know what a scalar is? Or longitudinal? Everybody know what this is? I'm going too far too fast. Well, a quick course in it. The light you see in this room has a wave component, right? And it's 186,000 miles per second is how it travels. A longitudinal scalar is not a wave, but longitudinal in a point, and it's at multiples of the speed of light. You weaponize that, you got something. And the United States has weaponized it. So that's the systems that they're using to track target interstellars as they come through the crossing point of light, step down from other dimensions into this dimension, hit it, boom, down they go. You hear of all these crash retrievals that have happened over the year, that's how they've happened. And I know exactly what the technologies are. I know men who've worked on the systems and operated them, much to their regret. And this then requires some people in governments and the grassroots to say, let's find a better way of making contact. Let's not recreate the mistakes of the last few thousand years, because a new era has opened, the hallmark of which is universal peace, not interstellar war. As great as that is for selling Hollywood movies, it's a very short future. Timeline, boom, stop. Right? Because we're not talking about these. You weaponize this kind of information and technology, it makes a hydrogen bomb look like a tinker toy. So we have got to understand that the existential crisis we have is really in consciousness and our social and spiritual development. But that has to be then applied into our policy. And what's beautiful about this is that even after explaining all this to the Ministry of Defense officials and their Air Force folks and intelligence officials in France, well, the first thing they said was, this is fantastic and terrible, when I explained the nature of secrecy in the United States, United Kingdom, and many other countries. And they said, but then if they said, well, I don't know how much we can do, we'll do what we can. As soon as they faxed me information about what they wanted to do with our team to go and make contact, they got a call. Their ambassador from France to the United States got a rather nasty call, irate, and said, what the hell do you think you're doing? And the ambassador from France to the United States said, well, we're planning to initiate this research project, but also a peaceful rapprochement with these interstellar visitors in a scientific but a visionary way, and we're cooperating with Dr. Greer and his team to do so. And the intelligence folks in the U.S. on the other side said, just stay away from any U.S. assets in any U.S. territory. And the guy said, look, it'll be on French soil, so bug off. And that's how that conversation went. But so there were all manner of delays, which when you see the translation of this letter, you'll see it. The Admiral Morin is apologizing for the delays because there's all this interference going on. You don't step onto this stage without, I mean, you're gonna, you know, anyway, you're gonna have the whole thing coming at you like a freight train, which we have. But the French stayed true to their purpose, and we eventually did a fantastic CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind event. Now, was anyone there in France in 2010 or 11? Yeah? Most people don't know that they were there to be trained, but it was actually an event for the Admiral and the Ministry of Defense. So they piggybacked their, is this disturbing or interesting? I don't know which. Well, this is the way I have to do things. They wanted to be discreet. So they piggybacked their admiral and their systems on a public CE-5. And of course they were there sitting in plaid shirts and looked like just regular Frenchmen. But the whole area, we were on a 2,200 acre estate, was cordoned off. And you'll see a photograph from a trans-dimensional ET vehicle that blipped in and blipped out very quickly there. But they tracked objects going over the site in excess of 200,000 kilometers an hour. And all kinds of phenomena in the field, weird things like something you see on Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You know, we had the cars parked in a hayfield and some interstellar trans-dimensional energy form went up and down the cars and turned the lights on and off, did all kinds of strange things. So they were very, very pleased with that. And so then they've sort of gone on from there. But the idea, just the idea that a Ministry of Defense official at this level, very senior admiral, and his team working at the highest levels of the French government would say, we want to pursue interstellar and intergalactic contact for peaceful purposes. This is huge news. This is an enormous development. The superlatives really can't reach it, just the idea that they'd go this far, and that they try it, and that they came, and that there's still operations going on, but they're keeping very quiet about it. Part of it is that there are elements of this so-called majestic group, MJ12. It's actually the Majority Committee on Intelligence. That's really what it stands for. That was founded decades ago. Have representation in France and also in French industry, and there's been a lot of pressure to cease and desist in France, as there would be against anyone in your government who initiated it. But at a certain point, can't we get together behind these folks and say, we're going to do it, and we're not going to be intimidated, and we're not going to be stopped, because it's time for us to go into this future that is peaceful and universal, and allow the public to know in an open CE5 event. This demonstration event in France was just a demonstration event for them. But eventually I see in the future, and I've had very lucid dreams of the future, where there's absolutely open contact with the full cooperation of governments and the military around the world, where they realize what a mistake they made making this secret, and what a mistake they've made creating an adversarial dynamic between humans and these interstellar civilizations. So I see that happening, and this was the first major crack in that wall of not only silence, but of stupidity. The stupidity of a militaristic approach to something that should never have been militarized. Never should have been militarized. And, there's a senator in America named Barry Goldwater who's passed away. He ran for president in 1964. And I was at his home in Arizona some years ago, and he had left the Senate. John McCain, the Senator McCain who ran for president against Obama in 2008, he took his seat. And I was at his home, and he said to me, he had found out about this information because he was a general in the Air Force Reserves and had been on every committee, Intelligence Committee of the Senate, Armed Services. He says, but I never got anything official about it. I only found out about from pilots and whatnot. I said, yeah, of course. They're not going to tell you at the Senate Intelligence Committee. They're never going to brief you on this. And, and he looked at me, and he just said, what do you want to do? I said, I need your help to bring this information out. And he says, yes, you're right, it's time. He says it was a goddamn mistake then and a goddamn mistake now that this was ever made secret. And I'm sitting in his living room. Very interesting. This is a right-wing conservative Republican saying this, and a military guy. So I said, well, what can you do to help? He says, I don't know. I said, who do you know? He says, well, I know everybody. I said, okay. So I started going through some names of current members of this committee, the Majority Intelligence Committee on Interstellar Matters, MAGIC, M-A-J-I-C. And I got to one name, and he knew the name. And it was Admiral Bobby Ray Inman. And Admiral Inman had been head of the National Security Agency, and before that, one of the deputy directors, CIA. But he left the government and got onto the board of Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC, which is one of the crown jewels of the contracting business dealing with anti-gravity and ET and UFO issues in La Jolla, California. And he says, oh, I know Bobby Ray. We've been friends for years. I said, well, give him a call, would you? So he did. Got a call from him later. He says, I can't make any more phone calls like that for you. He says, they read him the Riot Act, and Admiral Inman was made very clear, stay off of this if you know what's good for you and your family. So Goldwater tried to help us, got kind of shut down. Admiral Bill Colby, the CI director under Ford, was going to give us a 0-point free energy device and some just starter seed money of around $50 million to get it out to the public as an open source system. The week he was going to meet with a member of my board of directors, they found him floating down the Potomac River. Yeah, that's what happened to Bill Colby. So there's been a lot of sacrifice to get us this far. And so I think people have to understand that at a certain point, you've got to pull the folks together and have a mass movement to do it within government, but also with the public. And that's what we're working to do, to make contact, to effect disclosure, and to bring out these technologies, all three. You can't do one without the other. And by the way, that's why the subject in general is secret. Everyone says, well, couldn't they bring out the medical healing technologies? I said, no, because the physics behind transdimensional healing energetically is the same that would run your house without a power bill and use of petrol. Well, can't they just disclose that the ETs are here? I said, yeah, no. If they disclose that the ETs are real and they're here, or even those old objects on Mars, aside from collapsing the fundamentalist belief systems of people who think we rode dinosaurs like the Flintstones, that's 25% of Americans believe that, by the way. No, it's a true statistic. You know how you're riding the dinosaurs like that? They have a museum in Kentucky, $27 million, where they teach children that this is actually our history. Ideas so untutored it beggars the imagination. But anyway, everyone's free to their belief, and they're sincere, but they're sincerely wrong. And so this then, becomes, all this has to come together. And even if you acknowledge that there's intelligent life out there that has managed to get here, the very first question any astute scientist is going to ask is, how did they get here? When that question is asked, it shall be answered. When it's answered, it's the end of the world as we know it, like the REM song, but I feel fine. All right? Because there goes oil, there goes gas, there goes your public utilities, transmission lines, nuclear power, internal combustion engines in the boot of your car, not the boot, the bonnet of your car, you call it, or boot if it's some cars. Jet engines, obsolete, 1930s technologies. Rockets, 1940s. Everything changes. Everything changes. It's huge. So that is what they're forestalling. And by the way, one of the reasons why most public officials won't act on this is because they don't want to manage the change. I had a very interesting this is why this is such an act of courage, amazing courage by the French. God bless them. Because an admiral in the United States who is head of CONUS, Continental United States Security, very powerful guy, he said to us, my team, we were meeting with him, and he said, yes, you're absolutely right. This should come out. He says, but my real task is maintaining the status quo and the homeostasis of the global energy supply. That's it. That's why we're in the Middle East. And he says, what you're proposing would be so much change so quickly that no one wants to manage it. I want to retire from this command and go fishing at my ranch in Montana. This is what he said. So a lot of the secrecy is by inertia, is sort of the banality of evil. It's just not wanting to do it because it's easier not to. However, In the meanwhile, you have 7.2 billion people living on late 19th century technologies, destroying the biosphere, the have and have-nots gap growing, which is a prescription for global revolution and terrorism, by the way, of course. And on top of it, you have a renegade group of unacknowledged special access projects who do not answer to your elected and appointed officials or to mine in America, doing as they please, up to and including targeting, tracking, and shooting down these interstellar vehicles, trying to provoke World War III. That's what they're trying to do.